This year, just your brother's family, my mom texted. No hello, no warmth, just a sentence that cut like a knife. I typed back one word. Enjoy. What she didn't know was that I had built a life no one in my family ever cared to see. I had a 5-namalar ranch hidden in the mountains, a place I never told them about. And that year, I invited everyone they had pushed aside. We sat at one long table, no kids' table, no favorites, just laughter and warmth under the shadow of the Tetons. Then the photos hit the internet. My family saw the Thanksgiving I hosted without them, and the calls wouldn't stop. I'm Callan, and this is the story of how being invisible in my own family pushed me to build a life they could never take from me. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story moves you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a click, a comment can remind someone like me that our voices matter, that we're not telling these stories alone. The sun was sinking low over Puget Sound, the golden light spilling across the water like liquid metal. From the corner office on the 5th floor, I could see the ferries drifting steadily toward Bainbridge, carrying strangers to homes I would never know. My desk was cluttered with contracts I had already signed, evidence of a day that had changed my life forever. I had just sold the company I had built from scratch, an entire logistics platform that survived storms and pandemics, for $200 million. The coffee beside me had gone cold hours ago. The world outside looked radiant, alive, but inside, I felt that familiar hollow ache tighten across my chest, the knot that always formed when I thought of family. My phone buzzed. The name on the screen didn't say Mom, it just said Karen. A text blinked up, stripped of warmth, as blunt as a slap. This year, just your brother's family, keeping it small. For a moment, my stomach dropped so hard I thought it had fallen through the floor. My hand hovered above the screen, the old urge pressing in to explain myself, to ask why, to beg for a seat at a table where I had never been welcome. Instead, I typed one word: enjoy. Then I set the phone face down. No begging, no justification. Memories came rushing back in fragments, the kids' table shoved to the side while the adults laughed. My voice cut short mid-sentence so they could cheer Colt's latest touchdown, the birthdays forgotten, the Christmas cards that showed only his family smiling in coordinated sweaters. Year after year, the lesson was the same: to belong, I had to shrink. To be seen, I had to disappear. But as I stood at the window watching a ferry's wake cut through the sound, something shifted. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. If they wouldn't give me a seat, I would build my own table. Bigger, stronger. Mine. I opened my laptop again, not for contracts this time, but for the weather map of the Rockies. Jackson Hole was expecting snow, but the flights were clear. My ranch, 40 acres tucked against the Tetons, was ready. They didn't know about the ranch. They didn't know I had spent 2 years building a lodge with stone fireplaces, cedar beams, a wide porch that overlooked a private lake stocked with trout. They didn't know I owned something they could never define me by, because I had never given them the chance. I dialed Sam, my ranch manager. Check the kitchen stock, the woodpile, make sure the heating's solid, I said. My mind was already racing. This year I would host my own Thanksgiving, and I knew exactly who I would invite: Tucker, Finn, Quinn, B. Wade, and most importantly, Grandma Rose. The ones who had been cut out just like me, the forgotten, the overlooked. They were my family now. No kids' table, no favorites. Just one long table, enough for 40 people, food passed hand to hand, laughter echoing under the shadow of the mountains. That was the picture in my mind. I pulled open a drawer and saw last year's Christmas card, the one with Colt's family lined up in matching pajamas. No mention of me. I slipped it back inside like evidence in a trial, a reminder of what I was leaving behind. Then I closed my laptop, booked the flight, and turned off the lights in my office. The reflection of Puget Sound in the window looked like a road leading out. This year I would be the host. But a question lingered as sharp as the mountain air I was flying into when the photos from my ranch made their way back to Missoula. What would my family do, and was I truly ready to face them when they came calling? Long before there was a corner office or a mountain ranch, there was a drafty old shed behind my parents' house in Missoula. Colt was the star, the boy with the golden arm. The local paper splashed his face across the sports section. Local QB leads Grizzlies to playoffs. At Rusty Spur, the burger joint down the street, they gave him free food just for showing up. He walked through town like he owned it, and maybe he did. And then there was me, the boy in the shed. I scavenged old radios, broken computers, scraps of wire from the hardware store. I'd sit cross-legged in the dust, soldering pieces back together, coaxing life from machines everyone else had given up on. Dad would call me a tinkerer, not as praise, but as if I were playing at something that didn't matter. Mom would glance in and say, "That's cool, Callan," before pivoting right back to bragging about Colt's expanding role at the family store. At dinner, I'd try to share what I was building, an AI program that could learn patterns from traffic data, a crude idea then, but I'd be cut off mid-sentence so they could talk about Colt's chances of being scouted by Montana State. My 21st birthday passed without a mention. That Christmas card with only Colt's smiling family, it stung like salt in an open wound. And every holiday I was pushed toward the kids' table, a reminder that I didn't count. But in that shed, I built something real. At 16, I pieced together a small server enough to give a handful of neighbors internet access. For the first time, I realized the truth. If I could make a broken radio sing again, I could build anything. That dusty shed was my classroom, my sanctuary, my proof. The letter from Caltech arrived when I was 18, a full scholarship in software engineering. My hands shook as I held it, not because of the opportunity, but because I knew exactly what would come next. Dad wanted me in the family shop helping Colt with customers stocking shelves. "The store could use you," he said, like that was my highest calling. I chose differently. I chose myself. The glory wasn't in the headlines, it was in finally being seen, even if only by me. On the day I packed for California, I overheard Dad and Colt in the kitchen. They spoke casually as if I weren't in the house. "If we ever need him back, Callan can watch the shop," Dad said. Colt laughed. "Yeah, backup plan, backup plan." That's all I was to them, a safety net, a placeholder. I gripped the rusted piece of radio I had carried for years, my talisman, and swore I would never be anyone's backup again. Grandma Rose was the only one who looked me in the eye that morning. "You're building something real, Callan," she said. Those words carried me further than any praise from my parents ever could. At the airport, I boarded my first flight with the radio part still in my pocket. As the plane lifted off, Missoula shrank below me, a quilt of streets and fields stitched tight around a family I no longer fit into. The question that followed me west was sharper than any goodbye. Would what I built ever be enough to break the mold they had cast me in, or would I always be pulled back to that kid's table no matter how high I climbed? At 23, Denver felt less like a city and more like a test of endurance. I lived in a rented apartment where the paint peeled off the walls and the swamp cooler had given up long before I moved in. Summer heat clung to every surface, and in the winter I could see my breath in the living room. During the day, I worked in a repair shop, fixing cracked phones and short-circuited radios. At night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, coding for hours, fueled by ramen, cheap coffee, and the conviction that if I could make an old radio sing again in my father's shed, I could resurrect any broken system. That belief carried me into my first company. I thought I was ready. I found a small investor, hired 2 friends, and built a rough prototype to predict supply chain disruptions for hospitals. It felt revolutionary until one phone call unraveled everything. My investor backed out overnight. The money dried up, bills piled on my desk, and I was left to shoulder debts on my own. I sold my car, biked to the shop, and told myself failure was only temporary. The second attempt stung worse. This time I had 10 employees, a real office space, and momentum. But I overreached. Expansion outpaced revenue, and by the end of one quarter I couldn't make payroll. I remember standing in front of my team, my voice cracking, telling them I would find a way. I cut every personal expense down to nothing. I lived on instant noodles while making sure each paycheck cleared for them. That sacrifice wasn't noble, it was survival. But it mattered. Most people left. One didn't. Mia. She was the only one who stayed when the money thinned and the future looked like smoke. She came into my office late one night, dropping a bag of takeout on my desk. "You're building something real, Callan," she said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." Her loyalty was a kind of oxygen. Then came the pandemic. Hospitals couldn't find ventilators, blood bags, masks. Supply chains snapped in half. My app, Still Raw, was the only thing that could track inventory across 42 states. For weeks I barely slept, answering calls from frantic administrators, patching code between deliveries, mapping resources so equipment didn't rot in warehouses, while patients suffocated in ICU beds. We were never in the headlines, but we kept the system alive. A quiet kind of heroism, one no one in my family ever heard about. By the time the storm eased, contracts poured in. A major tech conglomerate circled. When they offered $200 million, I signed, not out of greed but relief. I could finally breathe. But I told no one back home. Not my parents. Not Colt. What would they have done with that information? Applauded, mocked. Used it as another reason to call me selfish. I wasn't about to hand them the script. With part of that money, I bought a ranch in Jackson Hole, 40 acres of freedom at the base of the Tetons. For 2 years, I poured myself into building it: cedar beams from local mills, granite fireplaces, a wide porch that looked out over a private lake where I stocked trout by hand. It wasn't a showpiece, it was a sanctuary. No banners, no bragging, no Colt to overshadow me. Just silence and ownership. Elise, my girlfriend at the time, wanted me to stop. She wanted wine nights and vacations, not midnight coding and phone calls to Wyoming contractors. When do you start living, she asked. I couldn't give her the answer she wanted. I chose the work, chose the vision, and let her walk away. Mia never asked me to stop. She wasn't my girlfriend, not even close, but she believed in what I was building. That was enough. I gave quietly, too. Donated refurbished computers to schools in Denver, outfitted clinics with free software licenses. I never attached my name. Quiet control that became my rule. I didn't need applause. I needed ownership of my life. An old investor, the one who bailed on me, came back years later, puffing his chest, reminding me how he almost bought me out. The irony was brutal. When the conglomerate signed the deal, they admitted the only reason they chose my app over competitors was because I had never given up ownership. If I'd sold out early, the product would have died. My stubbornness had saved it, and in turn me. One night after the ranch was finished, I stood barefoot on the porch. Snow crowned the Tetons like white fire, the lake frozen smooth. The word "enjoy" from my mother's text echoed in my mind. They still had no idea who I had become, and I wasn't sure if I wanted them to. The mountains loomed calm and cold. They were the measure of aspiration, and no money in the world could carry me to their peak. I knew the real climb would be inside me when the old family ghosts came knocking at the door of this ranch. By late autumn, the ranch was alive. Yellow leaves lined the driveway, lanterns glowed along the porch, and smoke curled from the chimney into the crisp Wyoming sky. Sam, the ranch manager, had been running logistics like a field general. We had an outdoor pit for roasting menus designed by a local chef who specialized in Western fare, and enough firewood stacked to last a month. Each guest would find something personal waiting in their room: whiskey for Wade, novels for B, a jazz record for Grandma Rose. I wanted them to feel seen, maybe for the first time in years. Excitement buzzed under my skin, but anxiety gnawed too. I couldn't stop picturing the kids' table from my childhood, the sound of laughter I wasn't allowed to share. This time it had to be different. This time no one would sit beneath anyone else. The first SUV rolled up and Tucker stepped out. He froze when he saw the ranch stretching wide against the mountains. "Damn, Callan, this is yours." His voice carried awe and disbelief in equal measure. Behind him, Finn and Sadie were already raising their phones, capturing angles, streaming live to their followers. B walked into her room and stopped cold. She covered her mouth with her hand before the tears came. "No one's done this for me in years," she whispered. That reaction alone told me I'd been right to build this table. Quinn clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. "You were always the cool one. We just didn't know it." And then Grandma Rose. She took my hand in both of hers, her eyes gleaming. "You've given us a real family tonight," she said. That sentence rooted deeper than any compliment I'd ever heard from my own parents. When the meal began, the table stretched across the porch, set for over 40. Plates piled high with roasted beef, cornbread, mashed potatoes. Wine poured, laughter. Rose guitars strummed by Finn under the open sky. Children darted around the lake's edge, their shouts carrying into the night. No kids' table, no divisions. Just one family chosen, stitched together by choice rather than obligation. I leaned back, taking it in, and for the first time I felt the warmth of belonging. Then my phone buzzed. Finn and Sadie's live stream had exploded beyond their circle. The hashtag Tamar Callan Ranch Thanksgiving was trending not just in Jackson Hole but back in Missoula. Screenshots of the ranch lit up feeds across town. My chest tightened. It was only a matter of time before my parents saw. I could feel the storm moving closer. Still, I didn't stop them. Let it come. Later in the night, Tucker pulled me aside near the fire pit. He confessed that my parents had cut him out of Thanksgiving too. No invitation, no explanation. This table, he said, voice breaking. This is the real one. This is where I belong. His words hit me harder than the cold. I realized the truth. I hadn't just built a table for myself. I'd built it for everyone who'd ever been pushed aside. I stood at the edge of the porch, watching the glow of lanterns, the laughter rolling through the trees. The Tetons loomed in the distance, a silent jury. For once I wasn't asking for a seat. I was granting them. The night was whole, complete, perfect. But even as the fire crackled and Grandma Rose hummed with Finn's guitar, I knew peace had an expiration date. The photos were already out there, and my family, my old family, would not stay silent for long. The morning after the feast, I sat in the ranch library, the walls lined with books that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The fire in the stone hearth still glowing with the last embers from the night before. The house was silent except for the distant sound of children playing outside, their laughter carrying across the frozen lake. My phone lit up again and again on the table beside me, vibrating against the wood until it rattled. 8 missed calls from my mother. 4 from my father. A text from Colt, sharp and sarcastic, real slick move Callan. I scrolled through Instagram and saw Finn's posts climbing in views, comment after comment from Missoula locals filling the feed. Did you see Callan's place? I didn't even know he had money like that. That lodge is bigger than half the resorts in Wyoming. Even the town pastor had mentioned me by name during Sunday service, according to a message from a cousin. It was out. The secret I had guarded for years was now public knowledge. I picked up the phone at last and called my mother back. I switched to speaker not because I wanted to share the moment, but because Grandma Rose had asked me to. She sat across from me in an armchair, knitting needles resting in her lap, her eyes steady on the phone. Karen's voice came through, breathless and agitated. "We thought you'd be busy in Seattle, Callan. We didn't think you'd care to come home this year." My father's voice cut in faintly in the background. "This isn't fair. You blindsided us." Grandma Rose leaned forward, her voice clear and sharp. "Don't twist this. You've ignored him his whole life. He built this without you, and now you're shocked he didn't beg for a place at your table." I stayed quiet, the old habit of defending myself tugging at me, but I resisted. Colt's voice suddenly entered the call. "All this for show, Callan? Really big ranch fancy feast live streamed for strangers. You just had to rub it in." I closed my eyes, steadying myself, but before I could respond, Grandma Rose did it for me. "At least he's showing kindness. At least he's building something where people feel welcome. You only ever built walls." The silence on the other end was heavy, my father's breathing audible. My chest felt lighter, like the knot that had been pulling me down for years was finally loosening. For once, I wasn't the one being judged. They were. And my silence, my refusal to defend or explain, became its own weapon. I ended the call without promising visits or reconciliation. I didn't owe them anything. I placed the phone back on the table and stared out through the frosted glass at the lake. For the first time, I realized the balance of power had shifted. The question was no longer whether they wanted me at their table. It was whether I would ever let them sit at mine. The calls kept coming throughout the day, but I didn't answer again. The ranch was full of laughter, music, and life, while my phone buzzed with desperation and blame. I wondered if they would leave it there or if they would push further, demanding entry into the life I had built without them. A week later, winter settled fully over Jackson Hole. Snow powdered the pines, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke, and the ranch seemed wrapped in a kind of peace I hadn't known before. I was preparing a shipment of donated equipment for the small hospital in town when headlights cut across the drive. I stepped onto the porch, my boots crunching the frost, and saw my parents' SUV rolling in Colt's truck close behind. No warning, no call ahead, just arrival. My mother climbed out first, her coat pulled tight, eyes darting across the lodge like she'd never seen anything like it. My father followed, stiff jaw set. Colt lagged behind them, his hands shoved in his pockets, tension radiating off him. "We need to talk face to face," my mother said. Her voice carried a tremor that was half demand, half plea. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn them away, but Grandma Rose was inside and I wasn't about to stage a war on the porch. I opened the door. Inside the living room, the fire was roaring, and the warmth did nothing to ease the frost between us. My mother started first. "You embarrassed us, Callan. The whole town is talking. You made us look like fools." My father added, his voice rough. "A place like this should be shared with family. You shouldn't be hiding it from us." Colt stayed quiet, his eyes flicking around the room, taking in the wood beams, the art on the walls, the quiet evidence of a life he hadn't imagined for me. Jealousy was written plain on his face. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "For years I was shoved to the kid's table, ignored, cut off mid-sentence so you could brag about him. Now you want to sit at the table I built." After all this time, the door opened, and suddenly Tucker B. and Finn stepped in. They had heard the raised voices. The room split in two without anyone saying it aloud. On one side, the family of blood. On the other, the family of choice. Grandma Rose stood up slowly, her cane tapping the floor. Her voice cracked with strength. "No one is entitled to what Callan has built. He did this alone. You don't get to claim it now." The tension was a storm. My father flushed red. My mother pressed her lips tight. And then Colt finally spoke. "You've done more than I ever thought you could," he admitted. The words hung there almost like an olive branch, but he didn't stop. "But you still don't belong here, Callan. You'll never belong." The sting was sharp but not unfamiliar. It wasn't hatred that filled me, then it was clarity. His envy ran too deep to ever let him see me fully. I stepped outside onto the porch, snowflakes landing on my jacket, the cold biting my skin. Behind me, voices still clashed, loyalties clashing across the living room. The Tetons rose in the distance, indifferent and eternal. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And I knew I had a choice to make, whether to open the door wider, slam it shut, or build the boundaries higher than ever before. Snow layered the roof like white felt, softening the angles of the lodge until it looked almost like a postcard. Inside, the tree stood close to 10 feet tall, threaded with warm lights and red ribbon, the kind my mother used to buy in bulk for church events. I set the table myself that afternoon, one long run of wood down the great room with mismatched chairs, no head, no foot, no hierarchy. I invited my parents, Colt and Tessa, and I asked the people who had already made this place feel like home, Tucker B. Finn, the cousins who'd been turned away, and Grandma Rose. I told myself this was the point of building a table of my own, to sit everyone together, to stop hiding, to see if the silence could finally give way to honesty. They arrived in a quiet stagger. Tessa's breath fogged the air as she stepped through the door, clutching a bottle of wine like a peace offering. My father moved with his usual stiffness, eyes roaming the beams, the fireplace stone, the framed maps on the wall, as if he were tallying the cost of each choice I'd made. My mother tried on a smile that kept slipping at the edges. Colt didn't say a word. He walked the perimeter of the room the way he had circled fields as a teenager, sizing up the yardage, deciding what it would take to score. Meanwhile, the people who had slept in these rooms and cooked in this kitchen laughed and set out platters and tucked napkins under plates, natural, easy, already belonging. We sat. Plates passed from hand to hand. I raised my glass. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I wanted one table. That's all." A simple line, but my voice shook anyway. I started to tell the story. I had never been allowed to finish the late nights in Denver, the tiny office in Seattle, the hospitals calling at 3 a.m., when every shipment had gone sideways. I described the first time our software rerouted ventilators in time to save a ward from shutting down, how the phone went quiet afterward, and I cried alone on the floor because no one would ever know. My mother reached across me toward the rolls. "How's the store doing, Colt?" she asked, bright, automatic, the same way she used to cut me off to ask about practices and playoffs. The room shifted. A fork clinked against a plate. That old cold crept up my spine, recycled from every holiday where I'd been seated a breath outside the conversation. Not tonight, I said. The words surprised even me. Every time I speak, I get cut short. Not tonight. Silence settled, then thinned. Tessa looked at her lap. Tucker held my gaze. Finn reached for his guitar and then set it back down, reading the room. I told them about the nights our cash melted faster than snow on the porch the day I sold the company. Not because I wanted a victory lap, but because I wanted to sleep without bracing for the next siren. I told them about buying the ranch and keeping it quiet because I didn't want it turned into a scorecard. Colt finally lifted his eyes. I didn't see you, he said. I was always the one people cheered for. I got used to it. You did more than I ever gave you credit for. My mother's eyes shone. My father nodded once, small and stiff. For a heartbeat, the room softened. Then Colt added, I don't know if I can live with you getting further than me. The softness vanished. It was honest in the cruelest way, like a truth pulled up by the roots and dropped muddy on the table. Grandma Rose rose as if from some deeper place than bone. This isn't a contest, she said, voice ringing clean through the rafters. It's about showing up. He showed up for cousins when they couldn't pay bills. He sent computers to schools without putting his name on a plaque. He built a place where no one gets sent to the kids' table. That's what family is. She looked from my mother to my father, not asking, not accusing, just stating the ledger as it was. I felt the heat in my face, not from shame, but from a line finally drawn. I don't need a seat at your table, I said. I built one. If you respect it, you're welcome. If you don't, there's the door. I won't shrink to fit again. No one moved. The tree hummed softly with the current of its own lights. The roast cooled. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed, unaware that history had just tilted. We ate the rest of the meal in careful motions. Tessa murmured thank yous as she cleared a dish. My mother dabbed at her eyes and stared at her napkin. My father stacked plates as if order might substitute for apology. Colt stared at nothing. When the door shut behind them later, the latch was louder than it should have been. The house seemed to exhale, and I did too, but it didn't feel clean. It felt like the truth finally out in the open, raw and air-stung, waiting to see if it would scar over or split wider. I stood by the window and watched the snow thicken over the lake. I had done what I came to do. Whether anything could be built from it was no longer something I could control. New Year's Eve came quiet and silver. I walked the planks of the dock with a glass of whiskey cupped in my hands, the cold biting at my knuckles. The lodge behind me glowed the way houses do when their full voices spilling from the kitchen, a burst of laughter, a door opening and closing, the sounds of people who weren't looking over their shoulders to see if they were welcome. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Colt. Didn't see that coming. Respect. I read it twice and couldn't tell if it was a truce or a fence post. I let it sit. Then one from my mother. Can we visit just us? Another from my father. Proud of you, son. I saved them all without replying. For once I wanted to test whether they meant the words more than they meant being answered. A new email slid into my inbox, an old family recipe written in my mother's tidy church basement script scanned as a photo. Pumpkin pie. Under it a line, for your next table. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. I didn't know if it was an apology dressed as tradition or just tradition refusing to budge. Either way, I stored it with the other notes that had started to accumulate this winter. Small offerings, small openings, nothing promised. In the cousins group chat, Tucker sent a photo from the porch, the long table bare now but for candle stubs and a few pine needles. Next year we do it again, he wrote. Thanksgiving 2.0. Finn replied, You flipped the whole holiday, man. I smiled in spite of myself. A tradition was a structure you could live inside. Maybe this was ours. I lifted my glass. To the boy in the shed, I said to the dark. I saw him as if he were still out there, knees dusty, soldering iron in his fist, coaxing sound out of an old radio no one believed could work. He wasn't trying to be applauded. He just wanted to hear something alive. Wind skimmed across the lake, smoothing the powder into a pale sheen. The mountains were just outlines now, a charcoal sketch against the sky. I thought about the long road from Missoula to Denver to Seattle to hear the way every mile had taught me a different kind of quiet. The survival quiet of not being heard, the focused quiet of work, the owned quiet of a place that didn't need to be explained to anyone. My phone buzzed again. Messages stacked up, cousins trading plans, B asking for a book recommendation, Wade sending a blurry photo of kids asleep under a pile of blankets on the den floor. Inside, someone started a countdown practice for midnight and lost track in the middle, and the whole room burst into laughter. I realized then that the question that had chased me for years, would I ever belong, had been replaced by a different one, would I choose to? I finished the whiskey and tucked the empty glass into my coat. Maybe my parents would change. Maybe they wouldn't. I wouldn't wait at a closed door anymore. I could leave it unlocked. I could set out plates. I could keep the porch light on, but I wouldn't stand in the cold, trying to convince anyone to come inside. When I turned back toward the house, the doorway glowed like a warm mouth of light. I stepped up onto the porch and paused, breathing in wood smoke and cinnamon. I slipped the phone into my pocket next to the recipe and reached for the handle. Behind the door were people whose names would never make the paper, but who showed up anyway, who pulled up chairs, who passed the bread and asked you to take the last piece. I opened the door. The room lifted to meet me. Laughter rolled forward and the heat hit my face, and I felt the kind of ease that doesn't announce itself, it just sits down beside you and stays. I wasn't reclaiming a seat at any old table. I was keeping the promise I'd made to myself in a high office above Puget Sound. If they would not give me a place, I would build one for anyone who needed it, including me. And maybe forgiveness would make its way across that table in time. But even if it didn't, freedom already had. The snow had long since melted from that first Thanksgiving at the ranch, yet the feeling it carved into me has never faded. For years I carried the weight of being unseen, dismissed, and forgotten, always told in small, sharp ways that my place was somewhere at the margins. I thought success would fix it, that if I built enough, achieved enough, earned enough, then maybe finally the people who had turned away would turn back toward me. But when the moment came, when the photos of that table spread and the calls from my family poured in, I realized the truth: validation doesn't come from the ones who never looked your way. It comes from choosing yourself, from refusing to shrink, from building something solid enough to stand on without asking permission. What began with a single text, cold, careless. This year, just your brother's family ended in a house full of laughter that wasn't theirs to control. That night I saw what family could be when it isn't about bloodlines or favoritism, but about presence, respect, and choice. And Tucker telling me that my table was finally his. B crying because someone had thought of her enough to prepare a room that reflected her Grandma Rose holding my hand with pride in her eyes. Those were the moments that stitched me back together. I realized then that the seat I had been denied all my life was never worth chasing. The real power was in creating a table of my own, one wide enough for the people who had always been waiting to belong. And when my parents finally came bristling with pride and defensiveness, the roles had shifted. They were no longer the ones who held the power to include or exclude. I was. And I learned something that night: silence can be louder than argument. Boundaries can be kinder than compromise, and sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is to stop begging for scraps and set your own feast. If you're listening to this now, maybe you felt that same sting, being the one overlooked, the one underestimated, the one quietly erased in your own family or circle. Maybe you've wondered if you'd ever be enough. I want you to know this: you are. You don't need their chair, their invitation, their stamp of approval. You can build your own table, no matter how small at first, and fill it with people who actually see you. That's the kind of belonging no one can take away. So if my story speaks to you, if you've ever sat at a table where your voice didn't matter, I hope you'll stay connected here. Leave a comment below. Tell me you're listening. Tell me where you're from. Or simply say hi. So I know these words didn't disappear into silence. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. Every subscription, every comment, every small gesture reminds me that none of us are truly alone when we dare to tell the truth. Because the truth is simple: we don't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table. We need to build our own and then open it wide for anyone who has ever been told they didn't belong. That's the table worth sitting at. That's the table I'm keeping.